Welcome back to the Deep Dives, where we take the sources you gave us and turn them into the most essential knowledge you need with none of the scrolling.
And today, we are going way, way back.
We really are. We're stepping far, far away from the confetti cannons and sparkling wine of the modern world. We're here to explore a kind of new year that was, well, fundamentally dangerous, deeply spiritual, and had absolutely nothing to do with buying a gym membership.
That's absolutely right. Our listener was intensely curious about the rituals surrounding the Norse concept of the new year. And what our sources reveal is just this profound chasm between how we view time now as a clean, sort of disposable line, and how the ancient Norse experienced it as this relentless cyclical turning of a wheel.
Okay, let's unpack this immediately, because the mission here really is to force ourselves to just abandon January 1st as a concept. When we think of New Year's, we picture clocks striking midnight, right?
Right.
A single moment of clean slate transition. We have fireworks, resolutions that are, let's be honest, usually forgotten by mid-February, and this feeling that we can just wipe the record clean.
But for the Norse, that entire concept was not only foreign, it probably would have been considered fundamentally reckless. Their year transition wasn't a moment. It was a sustained, ritualized period, a seasonal shift, a spiritual threshold, and crucially, a dangerous liminal time.
So no January 1st.
No January 1st, no pre-printed calendars on the wall, and certainly no clocks ticking down some, linear measurement.
And this brings us to that core contrast in philosophy. We look forward and we ask, what are my goals for the next 365 days?
Which is a question rooted in personal ambition, isn't it?
Exactly. A sense of entitlement to future time.
The Norse asked a completely different question, a question rooted in pragmatism, humility, and a profound respect for the cosmos, they asked. Has the world turned far enough for us to step forward safely?
Wow. That changes everything.
It shifts the focus completely. It goes from ambition and self-improvement to immediate survival, continuous honor, and alignment with forces much, much larger than the individual.
That is the essential insight we have to hold on to as we move through these sources. To truly understand their celebrations, their terrifying rituals, you have to abandon the modern linear view of time. This idea that time is a straight road we drive down, and instead step into a world where time was circular, sacred, and entirely dictated by the world they lived in.
Right. It was dictated by the environment they inhabited and the astronomical observations they made, and that necessity for observation is what made the transition so serious. Time wasn't a neutral backdrop for their lives. It was a physical force, something they had to endure, respect, and constantly monitor.
So if you're reliant on the sun, the moon, the seasons, just for basic survival,
then time is not something you own or manage. It's something you must appease. They were passengers, really, and their survival depended on reading the map accurately.
So let's dive into that circular flow. We are so utterly conditioned by technology, by school schedules, quarterly reports, to see time as a line.
A to B.
Exactly, point A to point B. It's this illusion of progress.
Yeah.
But the Norse worldview was built entirely on repetition. Can you tell us about the fundamental cycles that, governed their reality?
Well, they lived in these profound repeating cycles, and they understood them not just intellectually, but physically in their bones. The most foundational one is the relentless daily cycle of light and darkness.
Right. The sun comes up, the sun goes down.
Then you zoom out to the massive overarching cycle of the seasons, summer and winter, which for them meant abundance versus famine.
Life versus death.
Literally. And then most profoundly, the personal and communal cycle of birth, life, death, and memory. These repetitions weren't just facts of life, they were the framework of all existence, and they demanded ritual acknowledgement.
And the practical reality of this was their calendar, which, as you said, wasn't fixed. We classify it as lunisolar, right?
Lunisolar.
It wasn't fixed by a king's decree or standardized.
Yeah.
It was intensely local, guided by the moon, the sun, and the actual shifting agricultural seasons.
And that meant the new year couldn't possibly be a fixed, predictable date you circle on a calendar.
No way.
It was a dynamic moment. It happened when the balance of light and dark, of heat and cold, actually shifted. It was an event, not an anniversary.
They had to wait for confirmation.
Yes, from the heavens and the earth.
Okay, so if that's true, if time is something you endure and observe, not something you own, how did they balance that sort of profound fatalism with the need to actively plan and swear oaths for the future?
That's where the rituals come in. See, fatalism in the Norse context does not mean inaction, not at all. It means understanding the rules of the cosmos, which are fixed. You can't stop winter, right?
Right.
But you can prepare for it with the utmost seriousness. The transition periods were ritual heavy precisely because humans needed to apply pressure at the weak points of the cycle to steer their fates slightly.
So they couldn't change if the wheel turned.
But they could try to influence how it turned for their community.
That puts such a tangible heavyweight on everyday life. You couldn't just assume tomorrow would be like today. You had to pay active attention to the signs in the sky, the state of the harvest, the patterns of the tides.
Constant vigilance.
And that acute attention brings us to the most compelling and, frankly, terrifying concept in these sources. The danger inherent in that cycle transition, the thinning of the veil.
The thin veil concept is absolutely central to grasping the high stakes of the Norse New Year. When one massive cycle ends and another begins, whether it's the shift from harvest to deep cold or the cosmic shift at the solstice, you are standing on a threshold.
A liminal space.
And that space, that liminal time, is inherently dangerous.
And what exactly does that mean for the average person? What happens when the veil thins?
Well, the sources are clear. The veil between worlds becomes permeable. This thinning meant a dangerous increase in interaction with forces that are usually kept separate. The most immediate concern was the dead and the spirits.
So ancestors.
Ancestors were believed to walk closer, and the various spiritual inhabitants of the land, the Vetir, became more active and influential.
If the land spirits are more active and the dead are walking, then recklessness is simply not an option.
Not at all.
You cannot afford a mistake that might offend these powerful entities who literally determine whether you survive the winter or not.
Exactly. This requires incredibly careful, ritualized behavior. Imagine the end of your year not just as a time for socializing, but as a moment where the very fabric separating the living and the dead, the real and the supernatural, becomes weak.
So the observation of time, the rituals, it all becomes an act of self-preservation.
It is. It's about ensuring you navigate that dangerous threshold without losing your personal fortune or, worse, falling prey to the forces lurking on the other side.
And that is where concepts like Haminja come into play, which is a wonderful technical detail the sources mention.
Ah, yes.
It translates loosely to luck or fortune, but it's so much more complex than that, isn't it?
Oh, much more. Haminja is an excellent concept to introduce here because it ties the individual directly to the danger of the thinning veil. Haminja wasn't just random luck. It was a spiritual, transferable force tied to an individual or a family, often passed down through matriarchal lines.
Wow.
It represented a family's collective success, its honor, and its protective energy.
So if the veil thins during the New Year transition, what happens to your Haminja?
It becomes vulnerable. That protective luck could be stolen, corrupted, or simply depleted by encounters with malevolent spirits, Draugr or otherwise, or by breaking oath and incurring dishonor.
So the rituals, the oath-making we'll get to, the careful domestic security.
It was all fundamentally about safeguarding this collective Haminja so the family unit could carry their inherited luck safely into the next cycle.
You had to be very careful what you brought with you across that threshold.
Oh, very careful.
Okay, so given that they didn't have a fixed calendar, scholars point to two major periods where the year's turning was observed. And both make perfect logical sense based on this circular view. They represent two different kinds of existential risk. Let's start with the one that is perhaps less known today, but was arguably the most pragmatic. Vetrinator, winter nights.
Vetrinator, yes. It typically occurred in the first half of October, and it's our first strong contender for the new year. And it is defined by visceral, immediate necessity.
Not cosmic, but practical.
Entirely practical. In the Scandinavian context, the decisive shift was the end of the agricultural season. It was the time the cattle were brought in from the high pastures and the absolute start of the brutal, dark period of winter survival.
So it wasn't a gentle slide into autumn, it was the closing of the ranks.
That's a great way to put it. Vetrinator marked the end of the ability to easily live off the land and the undisputed beginning of the battle for survival against cold, darkness, and famine.
It's a turning toward resource management, pure and simple.
The focus of the rituals during Vednater reflects that urgent pragmatism. The sources detail extensive feasting, for example.
Which seems counterintuitive, right? Feasting before a famine.
It does, but it served a necessary economic function. You consume food that couldn't be safely stored, particularly perishable meats or early season brews, to prevent waste before the real cold set in.
So this wasn't merely celebration.
No, it was the controlled consumption of resources before the long fast.
And you mentioned appeasing spirits. Vetrinator was specifically focused on local land spirits, the Vetir. Tell us more about them. Why was their appeasement so critical at this specific time?
The Fettir is fascinating. They weren't high gods like Odin or Thor. They were localized nature spirits, house spirits, mountain spirits, water spirits.
This is specific to your farm or your fjord?
Exactly. They were deeply connected to the land where you lived and farmed. At Vetnatter, when you transition from respecting the land's bounty to taking refuge inside your house for months, you need their permission and protection.
So if I'm a farmer and I've just brought my cattle into the stall for the winter, I need to know the Faetirs aren't going to curse my milk supply or cause a plague on my livestock.
Precisely. Appeasing them, often with simple offerings left outside the home or near stored crops, was a risk mitigation strategy. It was ensuring the land itself, the immediate spiritual ecosystem, would tolerate your presence and protect your stores during the period when you were most vulnerable.
So for many communities, Veitnir was the most important turning of the year.
I would argue it was, because it marked the shift that truly mattered. The practical line between life and death through the coming scarcity. The new year started when survival mode kicked in.
That gives Vectir a very specific psychological tone. Closing ranks, profound seriousness, and a sort of slight fear of the immediate future. But then we move to the second, more familiar contender, Joel, or Yule. And this shift is less about the immediate practical danger and more about, well, high cosmic drama.
Joel, celebrated around the winter solstice from mid-December through early January, represents cosmic renewal. If Vetnatri is the start of the winter challenge and the closing of the doors, Joel is the moment of hope, the moment of defiance within that challenge.
It's so interesting how they treated time in these layers. They had the immediate practical turning in October, and then this deep spiritual celestial turning a couple of months later. Yule's significance is purely astronomical and mythical, isn't it?
It is. It marked the longest night and, crucially, the rebirth of the sun. Even though the bitterest cold and hardest snows were typically yet to come, January and February were often the worst, the astronomical shift had occurred.
The light was coming back.
Slowly, incrementally returning. And this signaled hope, the eventual thawing, and the slow, promised return of fertility, which was represented by gods like Freyr.
So Yule's the closest we get to a new year, but here we have to stress the difference, which is fundamental. It was absolutely not a single night like December 31st.
No, they did not celebrate a moment. They inhabited a transition. The sources are clear that Jal lasted multiple days, sometimes stretching for weeks. It was defined by a prolonged period of intense activity and heightened spiritual risk.
And if they inhabited this transition, what specific dangers did that prolonged time present that a single sharp New Year's Eve does not?
The duration meant the danger was sustained, not fleeting. The thinning veil wasn't a sudden gap, it was a prolonged porosity, exposing the community to sustained encounters with the non-human world.
And mythologically, this is where the Wild Hunt comes in, right? The Oscarade.
The Wild Hunt, yes. Odin leading this terrifying, chaotic procession across the sky.
Ah, the Wild Hunt. That's a marvelous detail. It's not just cold outside. There was an actual cosmic force sweeping through the land.
Exactly. This mythological belief made traveling dangerous. It demanded that people stay indoors, and it amplified the need for strict ritual observance.
It's the ultimate expression of liminal chaos.
It is. And the intensity of the observation, therefore, matches the importance of the shift. If you fail to observe properly or if you rush the transition, the consequences aren't just a failed resolution.
No.
They could be catastrophic, losing your Haminja, attracting the attention of Odin's chaotic riders, or failing to secure your stores.
So we are inhabiting this long, dangerous transition, fraught with spiritual danger and the fear of the Wild Hunt. The people needed specific, repeatable actions to stabilize this period and ensure safety. Let's transition now to the essential rituals that dominated this New Year period, starting with the cornerstone of Norse communal life, blot.
Blot, the ritual offerings, was absolutely central to both Vetnature and Jol celebrations. And these were not casual moments. They often involved specific animals, ale, or symbolic items given to the gods, spirits, and ancestors, and they were typically consumed communally afterward. It was a profoundly serious affair.
And it defined the community's relationship with the divine.
Yes. We mentioned earlier that we often hear the word sacrifice and think of submission or propitiation, but the sources frame the purpose of blot as a kind of spiritual diplomacy. Or maybe
Relationship maintenance.
relationship maintenance. That's perfect.
Yeah.
Can you detail the mechanics of that transaction for us? What was the expectation?
Well, that distinction between submission and negotiation is vital. Norse cosmology is based on reciprocity. So blot was a transaction, a gift given with an explicit expectation of return.
Okay.
The most common animal sacrificed at Yule was often the boar, which was linked closely to Freyr, the god of fertility and peace. The offering had to be costly and valuable to carry weight.
And in return for this costly offering, what did the god or spirit owe the community?
They owed protection, fertility, and favorable fortune for the coming year. The idea was, if you provide sustenance and honor to the gods and spirits, they are obligated, in a sense, to provide protection and prosperity, or at least to stop actively working against you.
So if the offering was insufficient,
Or performed without the requisite honor, the transaction would fail. The community could expect a year of poor harvests, war, bad luck. It's a dynamic contractual relationship.
you're trying to maintain détente with entities infinitely more powerful than you are.
Exactly. So the blot, especially the Joel blot, was a statement of communal intent. We honor the cycle, we respect your power, now uphold your end of the cosmic bargain and grant us a return to light and fertility.
And the larger the risk of winter, the more serious that diplomacy needed to be. The transition period demands maximum accountability from both mortals and immortals.
Now, perhaps the most socially binding element at the Joel feasts was the bragarful, the best pledge cup used for oath-making. If blot was transactional diplomacy with the gods, bragarful was transactional diplomacy with fate itself.
The bragarful elevated promising to a spiritual level. We don't recognize it today. These were not casual resolutions to read more books or learn a new language.
Oh.
These were public, binding, and dangerous to break. The very fate of the oath maker could hang in the balance.
And this detail is so essential. The person swearing the oath, perhaps to avenge a specific wrong or to perform a great feat of strength or honor, was doing it publicly. They're holding a sacred cup, likely in the presence of Odin as the witness, with the ancestors potentially listening in through that thin veil.
The social, spiritual, and metaphysical weight of that moment was immense. The sources often describe this as the moment a person's Hemingja was risked or cemented. You were betting your future fortune on your ability to fulfill that oath.
To swear falsely during Yule was not just embarrassing then.
Oh, it was a serious transgression.
What were the actual consequences of breaking a bragarful oath?
They were multi-layered and terrifying in that cultural context. Socially, you faced immediate dishonor, which could lead to social exile or becoming an outlaw, losing your standing and protection.
And spiritually.
On a spiritual level, breaking such an oath meant incurring the disfavor of the gods, particularly Odin, and potentially losing your Hemingja, rendering you unlucky, weak, and ultimately defenseless against the volatile forces of the cosmos.
So your reputation, your standing, and potentially your afterlife were all at stake in that one moment of promise.
It enforced moral and communal continuity. It stops you from just wiping the slate clean on January 1st and reinventing yourself. You carry the full, heavy weight of your word forward into the new cycle.
And that intensity is just heightened by this awareness of the spiritual environment.
The consciousness of the dead and the spirits was not theoretical. It was a tangible reality during this time. We've established the veil thins, meaning ancestors were believed to walk close. They were active participants in the community's present moment, watching, listening, judging.
So if the spirits and ancestors are actively participating, then the home front becomes absolutely crucial. What practical actions did the community take to manage this proximity?
The sources highlight protective and maintaining actions. Homes were cleaned meticulously, not for hygiene, but to make the space suitable for benevolent ancestral spirits and clearly delineated against malevolent ones.
Ah, okay.
Fires were kept burning continuously. Light was a defense against the chaotic darkness of the wild hunt. And doors were treated carefully.
Treating the doors carefully.
Yeah.
That emphasizes the threshold concept again. The door is the physical manifestation of the veil, isn't it?
It is. Between the known, safe world of the home and the external, spirited, dangerous world.
So cleaning and maintaining the home was about making it a welcoming place for helpful spirits.
But also about reinforcing a clearly delineated, well-defended boundary against disruptive forces, including the possibility of malevolent Draugr, the walking dead or hostile Vetir trying to enter. This wasn't necessarily paralyzing fear, but a profound spiritual awareness and respect for the threshold.
So the New Year preparation is less about party planning and more about profound domestic and spiritual security.
You are actively securing your space against an external environment that is actively more volatile than usual. You are never truly alone.
It makes our modern habit of throwing open the door at midnight and shouting "feel," well, ridiculously naive in comparison. They were consciously closing their defenses and fortifying their spirit.
Exactly.
So, We've established the setting, a dangerous, prolonged transition dominated by profound communal oaths and spiritual awareness. Let's look at the specific deities that governed this turning of the wheel. It tells us so much about what the Norse valued in a new year. They didn't choose gods of invention or creation, did they?
No, they chose gods of continuity, memory, and fertility. The gods honored during this time were perfectly tailored to the existential needs of the transition, balancing fate and function.
Let's start with Odin, the Allfather, typically associated with wisdom and war. But during the New Year transition, the sources describe him specifically as not a god of beginnings, but of continuity. Why is that distinction so important at this moment?
Because a cyclical society relies entirely on memory. If the past informs the present in a constant loop, memory is the most essential resource for survival. Odin serves as the keeper of memory. He ensures the continuity of knowledge, especially the knowledge gained through hardship and sacrifice.
So the act of swearing oaths during this time is an acknowledgement that past actions are binding on the future.
Precisely. And the other titles given to him during this time are crucial: witness of oaths and observer of fate unfolding.
Which links directly back to the terrifying weight of the Bragarful oaths we just discussed.
Yes, Odin, the god who sacrifices his own eye for knowledge, who hangs himself upon Yggdrasil to learn the runes. He knows the weight of commitment and the secrets of fate. If you are swearing a public oath that binds your fate, you want the most powerful, most knowing witness possible. Odin's presence ensures that the weight of the oath is recognized by the cosmic powers.
And this is where the silence and the careful planning come in, right? Because if Odin is listening,
Any reckless talk or empty promises would be recorded by the chief witness of fate, and that record would eventually influence your outcome.
so by swearing to Odin, you're committing not just to the community, but to the deep, continuing flow of history and memory, knowing that failure means cosmic, inescapable dishonor.
Yes. The new year wasn't a time to make new promises willy-nilly. It was a time to review the promises made and prepare to execute them.
That is the grim continuity. But the other major god honored is Freyr, who represents something entirely different. He's the necessary counterpoint to Odin's austere wisdom.
He is. Freyr is the embodiment of renewal, abundance, and prosperity. He is central to Joel because he represents fertility, peace, frith, and growth, returning after the absolute darkness of the solstice.
And the boar sacrificed the Sonar Gulf. That was for him.
Often, yes, the atonement pig, a key offering to Freyr.
So while Odin handles the intellectual and spiritual commitments, the faith and the memory Freyr handles the tangible biological needs.
Food security, healthy animals, and peaceful relations within the community.
Exactly. Honoring Freyr ensured good harvest and community stability in the eventual spring. It's a pragmatic petition for the return of physical life.
The Norse recognized they needed both spiritual rigor from Odin and physical abundance from Freyr to survive the turning of the wheel.
You can be honorable, but if your crops fail, you still starve. You need both aspects aligned. And finally, we have the Disir. These female ancestral spirits were honored privately, often in an event called the Disirblot.
The honoring of the Disir emphasizes that the turning of the year was intensely personal and matriarchal. Families focused on remembering their mothers, grandmothers, and female lineages. This is where the concept of inherited Hamingja often intersects.
So the continuity of the family unit, its fortune, was often attributed to the strength and endurance of the female lines.
Yes, and this practice underscores that the new year was a moment of profound gratitude and memory directed towards those who literally ensured your survival. It reinforces that the future was built by remembering the past correctly, especially those who endured hardship before you. It's a focus on deep lineage, not self-focus.
Yeah, this brings us perfectly to the most instructive contrast for us, the modern listener. What the Norse absolutely did not do during this powerful, dangerous transition.
Right. This is where we break away from the entire modern framework of New Year's.
Tell us what the Norse explicitly rejected in their approach.
Well, they rejected the individualistic focus. The Norse did not make personal self-improvement resolutions focused on vanity or individual ambition.
So no, I will learn to be a better singer, or I will lose 10 pounds.
None of that. The oaths were usually communal or related to maintaining honor and status within the group.
They also did not celebrate individual success, even if the past year had been prosperous.
No, this was a communal time of reflection and survival, not a time for individual triumph or boasting.
And most fundamentally, they did not treat the new year lightly. We throw parties and drink until we forget the past year.
They performed solemn rituals and swore binding, life-altering oaths. The sources are very direct. The focus was strictly on surviving winter, keeping honor intact through solemn oaths and ensuring the gods and spirits remained aligned.
Reckless celebration would have been considered foolish.
It would have been seen as inviting the very disorder they were trying to mitigate.
It's the total antithesis of the party mentality.
Okay.
If I'm a young farmer in Norway, my grandmother would have warned me not to be loud, not to travel alone, and absolutely not to make a promise I couldn't keep.
All things we might consider simple mistakes today.
But which could risk my Hamingja and my family's future then?
That concluding sentence in the source captures the mindset perfectly. The year did not owe you anything. This rejection of entitlement fundamentally changes the approach. If the year is not a gift or a promise of ease, but a volatile challenge that must be constantly managed, you approach it with respect and profound preparation.
You don't ask what you can take from the year. You ask what you must give to it to ensure your survival.
Precisely.
This whole deep dive is designed to help you, the listener, move away from the linear idea of time and recognize the profound weight of this annual transition. We noted earlier that modern New Year celebrations are often loud but hollow, full of noise, empty promises, and a false sense of a fresh start.
The Norse approach forces us to inject meaning and weight back into the annual transition. It's a challenge to our contemporary lack of spiritual and social accountability. The sources provide 3 powerful takeaways that contrast starkly with our current culture of constant forward movement and noise.
Okay, first, reflection matters more than noise. If you are serious about change, you need stillness.
Absolutely. If you are relying on memory, on Odin as the keeper of continuity, then sitting in careful silence and reflection, reviewing the year's actions and honoring those who came before you is essential. The communal act of feasting and oath-taking with serious contemplation translated into immediate binding action.
It wasn't just a fleeting thought after a few glasses of champagne.
No, it was a public declaration of your moral trajectory.
Second, cycles matter more than dates. We treat January 1st as sacred, but it's completely arbitrary to the environment.
The Norse recognized that true transition only happens when the underlying cosmic and natural reality shifts. The arbitrary nature of January 1st means nothing if the world around you is still locked in cosmic winter, waiting for the rebirth of the sun at Yule.
That awareness keeps you grounded.
It keeps you grounded in the environment and the reality of the seasons, rather than disconnected by a bureaucratic calendar. They accepted the world dictates their schedule, not the other way around.
And third, memory matters more than ambition. This harks back to the Disser in Odin.
Yes. The Norse New Year was not about starting over, a clean slate, which is the modern promise of January 1st.
That wasn't the goal.
No. It was explicitly about carrying forward what deserved to survive and maintaining unbreakable continuity. Your debts, your honor, your lineage, your knowledge, your inherited Hamingja. It's all carried into the new cycle. The goal wasn't to erase the past, but to use it as the foundation for future survival.
You couldn't just discard who you were on December 31st and invent a better, improved version of yourself on January 1st. You were beholden to the person who stood before the Bragoful cup and swore that public oath.
That sense of accountability is total. When the veil thins and the spirits are listening, the consequences for failing to carry forward your obligations are immediate and spiritual. They impact the community, not just the individual. And that's a powerful lesson in collective responsibility and the weight of one's word.
We, the modern listeners, we struggle to take our promises this seriously because the consequences are only personal. For the Norse, the consequences were cosmic. This has been a true journey from the brightly lit modern clock tower back into the deep shadows of a transition marked by survival, ancestral awareness, and unbreakable vows. To truly grasp the Norse New Year, we have to transform how we view time itself, from a line we race along to a cycle we must humbly inhabit and respect.
The difference is encapsulated perfectly in the questions asked at the threshold. The modern query is focused on the self. What do I want from the new year? It is a question of entitlement and ambition.
The Norse query, rooted in humility and survival, was, what must I honor so the year does not turn against me? It's a question of profound respect and transactional duty to the forces that govern their existence.
That approach fundamentally changes the nature of the celebration from one of fleeting pleasure to one of weighty spiritual commitment. It ensures that the transition is met not with distraction, but with deep, grounded reflection and the safeguarding of the invaluable collective resource, their luck, their Hamingja.
So as you continue your journey, remember the wisdom of the Norse, that sense of continuity, that profound responsibility to the past, and the recognition that the world doesn't simply offer you a fresh start because you want one. Time is not a line, it is a wheel. and always remembers how you step into it.